It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Larry Edwards, Chairman and CEO of E.ON Group of Companies and President and CEO of Global Fusion Institute. Larry is a visionary entrepreneur and technology developer with a strong background in entrepreneurship and marketing and more than 40 years of business experience in the U.S. and abroad. For many years, he operated a successful public relations and marketing firm in Hawaii, which specialized in tourism and real estate development projects. His understanding of the global market and technological vision have brought about significant breakthroughs in the lighting and energy fields. Recognized as a leader in economic diplomacy, he is noted authority and speaker on issues of global trade and development, particularly with regards to emerging economies. Today, his E.ON Group of Companies employs its proprietary technologies throughout Africa, with focus on housing and infrastructure, waste to energy and microgrid power, agriculture, and vocational and technical education. Mr. Edwards is a graduate of the University of Hawaii with a BA degree in Asian Studies, and he's also a member of Mensa International. Larry Edwards, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brant. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. And I'm sitting on the coast of Connecticut. We had our first snow day, and it's actually staying through the night. So I think we're going to be with it for a few more months. But you are quite far away. Tell us where you're sitting today.
I'm sitting here in Luanda, Angola, where the weather is quite different than that. It was a hot day, relatively hot day today, and it rained considerably. So
I can imagine. Well, Angola today would be in the middle of summer, right? Pretty much, or going into it?
Going into it, yes, that's correct.
Or is it really just kind of wet and dry seasons down there?
It's primarily that. There's really no 4 seasons, not really even 2 seasons. It's basically the sort of the cool, wet season and the slightly warmer, drier season.
Well, listen, you're probably the furthest away of any CEO I've interviewed yet on the podcast, so it's great to have that connection, and we can hear you loud and clear. But I know you didn't get your start there, and that's kind of where we always like to begin. If I recall, you're from the great state of Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us a little bit about your early years, where you grew up, and what your early family life was like.
Okay, I was raised on a farm 10 miles north of Woodward, Oklahoma, which is at the northwest corner of Oklahoma, just before you go into the Panhandle.
All right.
We had a small farm, 640 acres of farmland in the Sandhills, and I'm an only child. I was raised there with my parents up until I was 15, when we actually moved into Woodward, into the town, and off of the farm. But on the farm, our whole family was around. My grandparents on both sides, 2 or 3 uncles and families, all within about a 5-mile radius.
Right. And Dad grew up on the farm as well. As he come from a long line of farmers?
Yeah, he did. My grandfather on the paternal side originally was born in Illinois, and then the family had moved to, when he was younger, they moved to Winfield, Kansas, and then later he moved his family down to Alva, Oklahoma, and then eventually bought and settled on a farm there north of Woodward. And so
Yeah.
my dad was raised there, born on that farm, along with some with three sisters, no other brothers. And so the whole family really from the time
Stayed in
from
that area.
around
Yeah.
the turn around 1900 or so was
Right.
there in northwest Oklahoma.
Right. And were you expected to take over the farm business, or did they know at an early age, or did you know at an early age you'd take a different path?
I think that at the very early age, up until I was maybe end of grade school, well, everything was kind of oriented to the farm. But it wasn't long
Sure.
after that that changed. And of course, when the family moved to into town, that was the end of the farm. The farming
Right.
was
Right.
the farm properties were sold, and at that point, I had no real interest in or thought about really going back
Yeah.
into the farm life.
The door closed in many ways in that regard. Yeah. Were you a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
student in school?
yeah. I was. Um, I have to, you know, don't like to brag about things or anything, but I was actually it's something that I just kind of grew up with because from the first grade right through high school, I was always the number one academic student in the class, and
Wow.
so
Yeah.
I didn't know anything else. That's just all I knew
Right.
was that I was always at the top of the class.
Yeah. Yeah. Did it come easy for you? Did you kind of have a sixth sense, as they say, for the learning at that time as you're growing up?
Yeah, I didn't really think about it much. I just did the
Yeah.
work in the school and there, but it came very easy. And I think the one of the main reasons for that, which I definitely inherited from my father, was having a very good memory. I was
Yeah.
all, I almost never took notes all the way through school, even into college, because it was easier for me to just pay close attention to what we were studying and being taught, and then remembering everything than
Just
to
remember it. Yeah.
tie delay
Yeah.
by writing things down.
Yeah. Awesome. What about other activities? Were you involved in sports, music, theater, debate?
Not debate, but all of the others. Sports. Sports has been the big thing through much of my life, while working in later life and everything. I played uh, baseball, basketball, as far as team sports in high school and everything, and in college. Uh, and then actually, I played pro baseball very briefly.
Oh, you
Um,
did? Oh, cool.
yeah,
In major
yeah.
leagues, minor leagues?
I was in AAA, so one step
Yeah.
below the majors.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome. What position did you play?
I was a pitcher, like my
Yeah.
grandfather. I inherited that from my grandfather, not my father. He never played any of those sports. The only thing he ever did sports wise was a little boxing.
Right.
But
Right.
but
Cool.
my grandfather was a legendary baseball player in Northwest Oklahoma. I mean, everyone for he played until he was like 55, and he played on, league teams that traveled around over Texas and
Yeah.
Kansas and
Yeah.
things. And so that's where I got the
That's
baseball
where you
interest.
got it. Yeah. Did it come easy for you, like your studies did, baseball?
Pretty much the
Yeah.
pitching part. My grand
Pitching
my
part. Yeah.
grandpa taught me how to throw my first curveball, and that became really my out pitch all through high school.
Yeah.
But I was not, I'll tell you right now, I was not a great athlete, I wasn't fast to foot or anything like that. But anything I could do, particularly with my hands, shoot a basketball, throw a baseball, play
Yeah.
ping pong. I played international standard ping pong. So anything I could do with my hands and arms, I was fine with.
That's great. And you obviously have been an entrepreneur, as we talked about in your bio. Did that start at an early age as well? Were there entrepreneurial things you did as a kid?
Um, in a way, but it really started a little bit more in high school and then into college. Not too
Uh-huh.
much before, although I had a lot of interests along things like that, but no real experience in it. Again, being a single child,
An only child. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
only child. But taking, kind of roles of leadership always just kind of came natural. Again, it wasn't
Mm,
something I just set out to do. It just kind of came that way. So I was, took roles in leadership. I organized. I've always been an organizer, organizing teams when I was in those days, and all kinds of activities and things like that. So that was
yeah,
really the introduction to that kind of thing. And the business entrepreneurship came later.
yeah, got it. Well, you went on to college. I think you've gotten two BAs. I think you went to your local Oklahoma Christian University and then on to the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Tell us a little bit about the choices you've made in terms of choosing those schools and what you chose to study and why.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I went to Oklahoma Christian. Again, my father, after we moved to town, he had actually been a minister, a preaching minister for
Uh-huh.
since he was about 31, and we moved to town when the larger congregation in town asked him to come and preach full time. He was an
Right.
appointment preacher before.
Got it.
Um, so that is really what led me to Oklahoma Christian. That started at Central Christian in Bartlesville, and then just moved to a new campus, developed a new campus in Edmond, Oklahoma, about 2 years before I graduated from high school. So
Okay.
it was just kind of
Edmond's right outside of OKC, I think, isn't it?
yeah, it's on the north.
Yeah.
It's a north suburb, really, of
Yeah.
Oklahoma
Right.
City.
Right.
So that's what led me there. Okay. But then what led me to Hawaii was that I was studying language. I was particularly interested in languages. When I went to college in the first place, I was really, because had, you know, I'd been a good student in almost all of those areas. So I was really kind of battling in my mind what I wanted to study, whether I
Right.
would go the technical route with engineering and math and all, because I'd been very good in those, or in
Right.
the humanities route because I was a good I was already a writer. I had worked for as the sports editor of the Woodward hometown newspaper while I was in high school. And so I ended up going the humanities route. I'd also become interested in foreign languages and started teaching myself with books and things from the time I was in about the eighth grade, I guess.
Wow.
So when I ended up going the humanities route at Oklahoma Christian. I was really taking the liberal arts program at that point, the first 2 years, without declaring a true major. But I took three languages there. I took French, Spanish, and Japanese,
Wow.
um, unofficially on the Japanese side because it wasn't a formal class. But anyway, I took those, and that's what developed the interest in Asia and particularly
Yeah.
Japan. And so I transferred to the University of Hawaii, where I initially declared a major in Japanese language, but after about a year, I decided to expand that. So I changed to a major in Asian studies with a minor in Japanese language, and that's
Wow.
what I got my degree in. By the time, with the transfers and everything, by the time I graduated, I actually had enough semester hours for a PhD.
Right.
But they were really taken all as an undergraduate, so they didn't count for a PhD. But I had
Right.
185 semester hours, so it was
Wow. Wow. A lot of studies. And what was that first job that you took out of college, Larry?
out of college. I continued what I was doing while I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
I was a part-time sports writer for initially the Honolulu Advertiser, the morning paper, while I was going to school, and then when I graduated, the Star Bulletin, the afternoon paper, which was the much larger circulation newspaper in Hawaii at the time, offered me a full time position. So I that was my first job, full time.
Right. Right. Cool. And how did you like that? Was that what you kind of set your sights on getting out of school, or was it kind of that, needed to get that paycheck coming in as soon as possible?
Both, I mean, I've been doing it already. I've been writing a sports writer since I was 16, and at
Wow.
this point, it's already nearly 10 years later, and so. Um, at that point, I thought I would probably just end up being a journalist as a
Yeah.
career.
Right.
But
Right.
what
But
got
something
me
happened. Tell us what happened.
something happened. The the largest advertising agency in Hawaii, company by the name of Melissa Valenti Advertising, um, had just made the decision to turn their public relations services into a profit center
Ah,
instead of purely a support service for their advertising clients as it had been previously. So to start up that department, they hired a gentleman by the name of Bill Cook, who had been the city editor of the Honolulu Advertiser morning paper,
right.
and so when he started to build up his department, naturally for PR executives and writers, he went back to the people he knew at the newspaper,
Yeah,
and that included me. He hired
yeah,
me and two
right.
other guys. Um, and so that took me away from journalistic writing into, business writing
Yeah.
effectively, and that was quite an experience. I was there for only about a year because after a year, Bill Cook was selected by the current governor of Hawaii to manage his reelection campaign.
Ah,
And since the owners of the agency were supporters of the governor, they gave him permission to do that,
right.
gave him a leave. So we
Yeah.
continued to work there, but the governor was reelected. And upon reelection, he then called on Bill Cook to be the director of public information for the state of Hawaii.
Ah, interesting.
So when that happened, and since he would not then be going back to the agency,
Right.
the owners went back to the original plan of just making the PR function a support for the advertising. So they let all of us go that he had hired.
Wow. Huh.
But they did it in a nice way. Okay. They said, not our fault. They were happy with our work. It was just a change in policy. So
Right.
they told us if any of us wanted to like start our own PR consultancy
Hmm.
or anything like that, they would support us in that, and that we were free to take the public relations clients that were purely public relations clients for our own.
Sure. Wow.
So that was when I first went into business purely for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did
Terrific.
that.
And how many clients did you take over with you?
Initially, I had about four, but they were all four or five. I think it was all good clients. We had one of the leading developers. This was during the condominium building boom years in Hawaii,
Yeah.
and an engineer and developer there who was one of our clients came on board with me, and he stayed with me for a long time, even after I later moved to the Philippines.
Yeah.
And I had the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel as a client. I had
Wow.
the Hawaii Hotel Association, the Waikiki Improvement Association, the Downtown Improvement Association. So I was doing all their newsletters and publicity and things,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
and the Hawaii Visitors Bureau.
Ah, gosh, that's a big, big chunk of. Did you have a big team? How many folks did you have on that? That's probably the first time you started managing people, right?
Uh, and mostly it was a one
Yeah.
man job all during that time. But
Was it?
at the end, I started having some people assisting me in different. But yeah, it came that led into that.
Right, right, cool. Well, fast forward, you've had an illustrious career, and we'd take several hours to go all through it, but I definitely wanted to hit on some of the highlights. I know that
So,
have the Global Fusion Foundation and Institute, and obviously the Eon Group of companies. Tell us a little bit about the path towards those, because you've been doing those for about the last 15 or 20 years, and how you kind of ended up doing what you're doing now in Angola.
okay, well, what led me, and that, like I say, I had my two things. I had my own my public relations consultancy there in Hawaii for several years after that. But out of that consultancy grew another thing because one of my clients was a Danish fellow who had a 57-foot schooner
Ah,
and was running dinner cruises, off Waikiki and Diamond Head,
sure, for all the tourists, yeah.
right? And so he asked me to represent him and promote his business. So that got me into the sailing end of it. And
Well,
interestingly, growing up in Oklahoma, 800 miles from the nearest ocean or gulf or anything. I'd had two things I wanted to do in life. One was to learn to fly, which I never did, unfortunately, but the other was to learn to sail, and that gave me
Sail,
the
yeah.
opportunity to do that. And then I discovered in the process of working with him that something that I wouldn't have realized until then, but Hawaii had no yacht charter agency at all. Unlike the
Huh.
Caribbean and other island nations and the Mediterranean and all, where it's a big business, there it was not. It had
Huh.
never been organized that way.
Wow.
So I started, I continued kind of a career of starting new things. And
Yeah.
I started the first um, private yacht charter agency ever in the state of Hawaii.
Wow. It's amazing
Um,
to think. And that was in the 60s or 70s?
that was in 1975.
75, yeah, mid
um,
70s. Yeah.
when I did that. Okay, I did that in 1975, and that was a very interesting period. I had a lot of First of all, I had yachts listed for charter with me that belonged to Peter Fonda and the movie director John Ford, um, and and a couple of other those being kind of standing out that way. And then
Right.
I had clients. I had charters that. I did an evening cruise charter once for Ike and Tina Turner,
No,
when they
great.
were, and
Did they fight on board?
no, they didn't fight on board. At that
That's
time, they
great.
weren't doing that too much. And then later on the biggest vessel I had, which was John Ford's Mariner, 132-foot cats. Um, it was chartered. We chartered that for 2 weeks actually for inter-island cruising and all for Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice and a
Oh my
bunch of their
gosh.
colleagues from Jesus Christ Superstar because it was
Oh
right after
wow.
it had made it big on Broadway. He took the whole
Yeah.
crew out to Hawaii.
Fun.
So anyway, that was doing all of those things, and then later on, I got the um, I got talked into initially by the one who was actually organizing for the World Bank an international business conference um, that was held in Manila in the Philippines
Hmm.
in June of 1979,
Right.
and that's what led to the big changes in my life from that point
Yeah.
on because I
Yeah.
went to that. He talked me into going, and it was a week long event with really high powered people there from all of the development banks around the world. A number of the major corporations, like at the time Control Data Corporation was a sponsor and all. And so I ended up making the decision to move to the Philippines to take
Wow.
advantage of the business opportunities that grew out of that conference.
Wow.
And,
Fantastic.
and a couple of subsequent trips I made back for like 6 weeks at a time over the next year before I finally made the move in June of 1980, a year later. And I ended up in the Philippines for 11 years.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah.
And so,
Ferdinand Marcos periods, I believe, right? Wasn't he the president
very,
at that time? Yeah.
very definitely, I was there for. I mean, it was under martial law when I got there.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Sure. In the late
and then
70s,
I
early
went
80s. Yeah.
through the People Power Revolution after that deposed him, ended up
Yep.
deposing him, and 7 coup attempts over the next few years through 1989. Uh, so I have often referred to that period there as a laboratory in crisis management.
And I'm sure that was an understatement, right, Larry?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, multinationals, after the Philippine economic crisis hit after Aquino was assassinated at the airport
Yeah.
in 1983 and before Marcos was deposed in by that People Power Revolution, and that financial crisis hit, and multinational corporations were moving out, at least for the,
Yeah.
maybe not permanently, but for the duration to wait it out because the peso devalued from 8 to the dollar to 24 to the dollar within
Wow.
6 months. In six
Yeah.
months.
Crazy.
So, and that is when right at the time when we decided to go in the direction we did with our uninterruptible power equipment because we had already become, we had introduced solar panels, and we were the first manufacturer of solar panels in the Philippines
Wow.
in like 1981.
Wow. Great.
Um, but then when the crisis hit, we lost our contracts and all for that because all foreign exchange contracts were canceled due to the financial problems. And
Right.
but we saw an opportunity. We didn't want to leave like the rest of them were. We saw an opportunity because of the already bad but further deteriorating power conditions, and we had answers to that
Yeah.
with our equipment that no one else had, and that set us on the course that we've been ever since. Of course, it's now expanded further beyond power, but that was our core business for about the next 20 years.
Yeah. Great. And you built up companies around that idea, basically, right?
Yeah, we I came back in 1990 when I moved back because we were being asked to provide our equipment back in the U.S. and by
Right.
American
Right.
companies we had served in the Philippines, like Colgate, Palmolive, and others. So I came back in 1990 to really research the market back in the U.S. and I got very strong support from Philips, from GE, all because they said there is nothing in the U.S. market anything like what we had.
Wow.
Um, so that really put the impetus there. So for the next from 1990 up until about 2007, we were primarily operating in the U.S., supplying the U.S.
Right.
market for those things,
Right. Right.
and then that, but yet we didn't forget where we came from. See, we developed what we were doing in a developing country, okay, to answer
Yeah.
the power needs and all that you find most often in developing countries.
Yeah.
And we had we had determined at the time that the ultimate market really for electrical power equipment and things was Africa because it was the most unelectrified continent on Earth. During that period, we were marketing in the U.S. Some interesting times too, because you will remember in 1993 the first World Trade Center bombing,
That's right. Yeah.
and they had like 3,000 smoke inhalation injuries of people that were fighting their way down dark, dusty stairwells after the bomb went off in the basement that knocked out all of the power, and including emergency lighting, which was only tied to the generator that got blown up in the basement. So
Right.
shortly after that, I get a call from the Port Authority of New York through an introduction of our manufacturer's rep in New York, uh, who had already gotten us into the New York City public schools with our lighting systems. And so we get a call, and they want me to come to New York and demonstrate our system to their engineers. And so I find myself in a room with about 40 or 50 engineers uh, where I'm doing a demonstration of our uninterruptible lighting system. And subsequently, they installed our system throughout both towers of the World Trade Center, then the Lincoln Tunnel
Wow.
and the Holland Tunnel, because they were afraid of possible terror attacks on those tunnels that would have caused all kinds of disruption, of course.
Right.
So that was an interesting thing that happened, and kind of helped. We ended up in a lot of federal facilities. We were installed in the House of Representatives, at NASA,
Mm.
and many other uh, GSA headquarters, many other things with the government, plus a lot of colleges and universities and high schools were putting our systems in. So,
Yeah.
so then we decided, okay, it was time to make a move overseas again. And in 2006, we hosted, along with Oklahoma Christian University, where I, of course, went my first 2 years of school, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda on his first visit to Oklahoma, where
Ah.
it was to sign an agreement for a presidential scholars program that would take the top 10 students out of the country of Rwanda coming out of high school and send them on full scholarship to Oklahoma Christian. Um,
Wow.
and that program to date has put more than 1,000 students very successfully through that program. Um,
Fantastic. Yeah.
and on that visit, when he signed the agreement, Dr. O'Neill, the president of Oklahoma Christian, who's now retired from there but on our board, um, asked me if I could possibly arrange for the president to speak to the Oklahoma legislature, and I had
Wow.
all of 2 weeks' notice to put that together. So, but fortunately, we were able to pull it off. I was able to get it done, and they called a special joint session of the legislature
Wow.
just for him to speak. And
Wow.
while he was speaking, I was doing a technology demonstration in one of the meeting rooms at the state capitol for four of his cabinet ministers who had joined him on the trip. One of whom was the
Right.
minister of infrastructure and energy, which was, of course, particularly down our alley. And
Right.
that's when right after that presentation, I got invited to go to Rwanda and bring our technologies and all there. And that's what led to me actually physically for the first time going to Africa, which was
That opened up Africa for you.
that
Yeah.
opened up
Fabulous.
Africa, and then I've been here, going and coming and everything, but I've been here ever since 2007.
That's great. And tell us about, are you still pretty much doing the same thing? Is it power? Is it lighting? What is the infrastructure projects that you've been working on most?
Okay, we came at invitation, of course, as I mentioned, primarily to talk about power. Our two things: our power. We were actually the first in the world to do microgrids in the Philippines in the early '80s. Nobody was even using the term then. Nobody knew,
Right.
it wasn't a popular term. Now, of course, everybody knows microgrids.
Right.
So we were asked to come to present our power technologies, which included the microgrids, but also in the subsequent years we added technology for waste to energy, and that was of great interest.
Huh.
Um, so I have been to several countries in Africa. The first thing to present the waste to energy projects, but then that led into the others because we're diversified. That has been expanded now to include all of the essentially the basic needs. Which the basic needs are power, housing, food, production,
Right.
and of course education, technical education, and sanitation. We're in all of those areas. Um,
Right.
and as it's turned out now here in Angola, it's kind of a great circle for me that I never thought would happen. I'm right now the vast majority of our projects and efforts here in Angola now are in agriculture, farming.
Huh. Fantastic. Yeah. Right. You're full circle now, Larry.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a lot different. It's a lot different stage than it was growing up. Like I say, we had
Yeah,
a
I can imagine.
640
Yeah.
acre farm. Now we have 600. Well, it's actually 1.5 million acres, 600,000
Wow.
hectares of land here.
Amazing. And what are you farming or helping to farm primarily?
Well, we're getting ready to launch the actual farming activities in about March. We've been, it's taken a tremendous amount of planning and organizing and determining what crops go where and all of this sort of thing with that much land. So we're now at the launching standpoint. And I'll tell you, it covers the gamut. It's divided up into 6 areas, which the USDFC, International Development Finance Corporation, advised us to do to structure it
Right.
this way. We're in 6 areas. One is plantation crops. Second is grains and hay. Third is horticultural, fruits and vegetables. Fourth is
Yeah.
meat production. Fifth is dairy production. And sixth is aquaculture. And that's all
Wow.
on the production side. And then to go with that is another area, which is all of the processing, manufacturing of things like fertilizer, inputs, fertilizer, livestock feed, and then the processing of all of the things that we produce from meat to
Right.
fruits and vegetables, canning, and all of that. But
Wow.
I would want to signal.
And is it all for local consumption, Larry, or is it also for export?
It is definitely, it's both. Okay.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting that on the local side, Angola presently imports about 85% of its food, whereas
Wow.
before becoming independent and launching into that 27-year civil war starting in 1975, they were referred to as the breadbasket of Southern Africa and were a
Yeah.
net food
Yeah.
exporter. So
Right.
now it's not just doing a project like of our own in a way, it's really helping rebuild the entire
Build that back. Yeah.
agriculture industry of a whole country.
Right. Right.
And
Now, did you move to Angola when I mean, you mentioned Rwanda was your first connection back. Did you come to Rwanda and then Angola kind of came out of that? Because there are uh, different countries, certainly different culturally and also geographically within the continent.
yeah, initially we were invited to Rwanda, but on the very first trip, we also I spent time in Kenya, Tanzania, and
Right.
Democratic Republic of the Congo. We were invited to all those places. Then later on, we actually, after the 2008 financial crisis that just set everything back for everybody, including us,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
paused a bit. And although we were keeping our contacts going, we were not really active until I got pressured really by Zambia to come and meet with them in January of 2016, again on the waste of
Huh.
energy. And so from
Huh.
there, I was in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and all during this time, Angola was pressuring me to come. But it was not easy to do. At the time, they were under Dos Santos, the former president, and the rules on getting a visa to come to Angola were very difficult. You had to apply in person at their embassy in your home country. You could not do it from a third
Uh-huh.
country. And since I was in Africa, I
Right.
couldn't get a visa to come here. I had to go back to Washington to get a visa to come.
Ah, interesting.
So
Huh.
I first arrived here actually then in October of 2016. So it took me about 9 months to be able to organize all of that to get here. And
Right.
at
Right.
the time, I'll tell you very candidly, if anybody had told me then that Angola would be the primary place we'd end up developing most of the projects, I'd have said you're crazy.
Funny how those things happen, huh?
It is. And now, of course, I've been here for 2 years now straight because I came in January, almost 2 years. I came in January of 2020 on the last trip, intending to be here for 3 months and then back and forth.
Right.
But of course, I got
Right.
locked down here in March.
Yeah.
And
With
I've been here
COVID.
ever
Yeah. Yeah.
since.
Yeah. Yeah. Fabulous. And how big is your team there now on the ground?
On the ground here right now, it was big, a little bigger before because of COVID. I
Yeah.
can't bring it, I haven't been able to bring some of them back, but that's going to change
Right.
shortly. I've got probably uh, altogether maybe about 30 people on the ground, including our
Yeah.
local people here
Yeah.
as well as,
Right. Right.
and I've got a whole
And
team.
how is the workforce there? Are you finding educated labor and the people you need to help with regards to these various projects you're underway with?
There are, I mean, there they have a huge unemployment. It's like 52% unemployment. So there's plenty of labor.
Wow.
Now the problem
Wow.
is having the skills and the training. They need that
Yeah.
desperately, which is why one of our main projects tied with all of this is we will be building and operating vocational technical schools in association with the career tech system of the state of Oklahoma.
Right. Right.
So we'll be doing a lot of training, but there are a lot of people desperately looking for jobs that are capable people, and there's still an adequate number of people at least to start with that do have training that are engineers or technicians and
Yeah.
things that
Well educated.
yeah
Yeah.
that are relatively well
Yeah.
educated. We're also
How long was Angola a Portuguese colony?
uh, about 500 years.
Yeah, it's quite a long time. I had
Yeah,
no clue,
about
so
like Spain
yeah,
and the Philippines, about 500
yeah,
years.
right.
It ended in 1975, so
Yeah.
very long time. Uh,
Yeah, fabulous.
but
Great. Well, looking ahead, and we're just about out of time, but I've got a couple extra
no,
questions for you.
okay.
We hear so much about the potential of Africa, and yet there's always so much disappointment. And you're one there that's been on the ground there, not by choice, but obviously you've kept your head down, tail up, working on the things that you're working. What's the key to unlock the potential there with so many resources and a fairly well educated labor base and obviously a world that would love for Africa to come up alongside and not be be an exporter of things, not necessarily always an importer of things, as you shared earlier.
Okay, I'll come up with my what a lot of people have taken from me now as my now become famous three P's. You have to have. It really applies to almost any doing business in any developing country on the ground. Uh, Patience, persistence, and presence.
Mm,
Uh, and if you
yeah,
don't do all three, if you don't have all three, you might as well not start because you're not likely to be
yeah,
very successful.
right, right,
They're still old school in the sense, kind of like Japan and everything, and some of the others that they want to see you across the table from them. Maybe not
yeah,
all the
right,
time, but
yeah,
you got to be there. They want a
yeah,
personal relationship, not a long distance one.
right,
And
right.
they've been burned so many times in the past by charlatans and cheats and things,
Fly by nights. Yeah,
as well as
yeah,
being exploited, for 500 years by the European colonial powers and things, that they're very skeptical. And so you have to kind of
right,
prove yourself to them. But if they see you there and they see that you're committed, that it gets you a long way. I've had so many people in several countries tell me, and from Rwanda to Kenya to here to South Africa and everywhere, I've literally been told that they look at America, many of the business people and all look at America as their last hope because they said they've
mm,
been exploited by the Europeans for 500 years. Now
right,
they're being exploited by the Chinese who are trying to take over
yeah,
everything. Okay,
right, right,
so they look at us and they know enough of most of them know enough about history to realize we were not a colonizer. Okay, we were a colony, like
that's
like
right,
they've been for a period of time. So that gives us a heads up. But the difficulty is getting American companies to come here and do business.
yeah,
They'll gladly sell product over here, but to come here and get on the ground and because they say we don't want exploiters, we don't want people long distance just selling us stuff. We want partners
yeah,
that can bring
they're going to
technology, bring
invest. Yeah,
finance, bring
yeah,
know-how, and work with us. Not
right,
so that's the key. If you do that, if you build your it's all relationships. Foreign business, international business is based on relationships, whereas domestic business anywhere is based more, it includes relationships, but it's more based on transactions. Because if you're in
yeah,
a
that's right.
if you're in like in America, you can do business if you're in Oklahoma with somebody in New York you never meet and feel fairly confident about it for the most part because the information is there and you're in the same system, the same legal system, same
Yeah,
accounting systems, same general culture and everything. But when you cross borders, it's different.
yeah, yeah. No, it's so
So
true.
it
So true.
takes
Well,
relation.
Larry, you've been very generous with your time. We always have one last question we ask all our guests, and that's kind of what career and life advice would you give to someone that's listening that maybe has their eyes on the corner office, or more importantly, maybe sees their career entrepreneurial base like yours. You got the three P's. We got that down.
That's
That's important.
the first thing for international business is
Yeah,
memorize those and commit yourself to them. It takes commitment. Okay, it takes commitment. You got
yeah,
because you can't just fly in and out. I mean, it takes commitment for you, and it takes commitment to get them to believe in you. So, yeah, I would say in terms of giving otherwise advice, I know like the question asked, like what would I tell my younger self maybe years ago as
right,
well.
right.
And I kind of came up with this. I would say, first of all, don't limit yourself. Too many people limit
Mm,
themselves. Okay.
yeah,
Secondly, you really need to trust others as much as possible. Okay. But also, the corollary to that is you've got to be very aware there will be threats that sometimes have to be dealt with firmly, and people who will try to take what you have or take advantage of you, no matter where you are.
Right.
You have those things to
Right.
do, but you got to balance that line. You don't want to be constantly not trusting anybody. That's not a pleasant way to live. But at the same time, you have to really have your radar out. You have to be aware as you move forward. So then
Yeah.
I would say you need to try to build relationships, firm relationships with people you can learn from, and who will also look out for you and your company's best interests, not only their own. So
Right.
again, be persistent, patient, don't easily give up or be led astray from your own convictions and your objectives.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Well, Larry Edwards, Chairman, CEO of the Eon Group and President, CEO of the Global Fusion Institute, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.